Well, this is Elizabeth Farah, the Elizabeth Farah Show, but frankly, this episode is going to be another in our long stream of episodes on America First immigration, but a different facet of it, because they're all interrelated. Reshoring, offshoring, tariffs, it's all related to our economy and to labor and to the middle class and to small businesses and to flourishing in this country and putting our people, our students, our workers, and our businesses first over and above everybody else in the world. And today, joining me is somebody that I've been looking forward to talking to for a long, long time, Spencer Morrison. Spencer came to my attention some time ago because he's done so much work on trade, tariffs, barriers to trade, offshoring, what it does to our economy, and what the real truth is, because what we are hearing is primarily a lot of garbage. And so bringing Spencer on, I've been waiting for his new book, and unfortunately, I did not get to read the whole thing, which I always do before an interview. So we're going to probably have to have a follow-up, Spencer, of this book, Reshore. We're going to talk about it, of course, but I want to have read it and have you back in. So Spencer, I'm going to give you a little introduction, and I'm going to read it because I didn't memorize it. He's a lawyer, entrepreneur, and independent intellectual with a focus on applied philosophy, empirical history, and practical economics. He's a founding partner of Morrison, LLP. So he's an attorney and works primarily in the areas of divorce and civil litigation, wills, and estates. And what I found very interesting is that he provides extensive pro bono legal services to the victims and families of trafficked children, which has been on our minds for years now, of course, because of Biden's border policy. But we're not going to talk about that today. He's also editor-in-chief of the National Economics Editorial. His work on tariffs and trade policy has been featured in major publications, lots of places, Foundation for Economic Education, American Greatness, etc. So now he's at WorldNetDaily here talking to me, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the program. It's a big honor to be here.
Thank you, Spencer. So you've got your book that is brilliant. I've read excerpts of it. I know what's in the book, even though I haven't finished reading it. And I wanted to get a start on just talking about some history, because this fascinates me. The Declaration of Independence is our founding sort of mission statement. And at the beginning, we all know that. We all know, the pledge of our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honors by our founding fathers. But in between, where Thomas Jefferson is listing off the objections that the American populace of the colonies had to Great Britain, a lot of it has to do with what we're seeing happening in America even today. They would be appalled. So why don't you first talk us through what's in the Declaration that reminds you or is related to what's happening and has been happening in trade for decades in America?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's some parallels based on what's going on since 1974, when America started to embrace this sort of economic globalism, and what was happening in the 13 colonies. In both cases, America's economy was geared around the extraction, or was increasingly geared around the extraction of natural resources. If we look back at the colonial period, America was really set up to provide Great Britain and Europe more generally with sort of agricultural products. For example, the exportation of tobacco was really how the Virginia colony got set up. And it wasn't just tobacco. The colonies were exporting all sorts of sort of agricultural and unrefined products. Cotton is a big one, especially in the 19th century. But as the colonies were trading these raw materials, they were also exporting all of these refined products, or they were importing all of these refined products from Great Britain. What Great Britain did was actually very smart. What they did is they used the colonies to expand the market for their manufactured product. And they did all sorts of sort of devious ways to go about this. They even went so far as to ban foundries and iron slitting mills in the colonies. They banned the exportation of blueprint for machinery to the colonies. And the whole point of this is that they didn't want the colonies to industrialize or to manufacture products. And the reason for that is, well, twofold. The British wanted to expand the markets for their manufactured goods so that Great Britain could have become the factory of the world, which eventually they did.
What a good idea.
Right. It's a smart idea. And you know why? Because all of these manufactured products have a very, they have complicated supply chains. They have a lot of human capital and knowledge that's invested into them. And there's a lot of capital accumulation that goes into it. I mean, you think about the capital that's acquired and accumulated to set up a farm or a plantation, and compare that to the amount of that's put into a factory. I mean, really, for a farm, you just need land. You can plant tobacco seeds, and eventually you'll have a business. But in Britain, they didn't have that option, so they were really building a lot of factories, canals, ports to get these products made. And as a result, the British economy just exploded. By the time of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people don't know this. 20%, 1 in 5 British men were working in factories, in manufacturing. And that was over double the proportion of anywhere else in the world, which is crazy if you think about it. So the Industrial Revolution, we all talk about it starting in the 1800s. It started earlier, and the reason for it was because a British industry was piggybacking on the colony. And that's exactly, to lead this back in today, that's exactly what China did today. So when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, they really set up their economy in such a way as to take advantage of the American market. So they had all sorts of barriers to entry, so American goods couldn't flow into the country. They gave, low or interest-free loans. They gave preferential land use to companies that were designed to export. And as a result, China was able to industrialize absolutely furious pace. Within the space of 20 years, China's industrial economy has grown from, smaller than America's. It's now triple the size. So their for everything that we produce, manufactured goods, they're producing 3. So it's really crazy what they've been able to do in the space of 20 years. And they really just did, sort of tried and true historical method, which is whereby you export high-value manufactured products and you import low-value raw materials. So that's what Great Britain did to the colonies, and that's what China is currently doing to America. So it's really a horrible situation we're in.
None of it makes sense. Americans aren't stupid. Chinese people aren't stupid, and the British weren't stupid. What we're doing is we 20 years ago, and actually it goes further back somewhat to when we, gave them most favored nation status. And then I think it was around 2000 or so when I was reading the transcripts of the discussion in the Senate, I believe, where they went over, where they were debating whether they should get permanent trade status in this most favored nation status in America. And there were a lot of really good arguments against. Biden, of course, was for it. And his arguments for it were so stupid that it made me laugh out loud. But some things are so simple to understand. A factory in the middle of a small, medium-sized town produces jobs. I mean, the town provides factory jobs. I mean, provides the workers for the factory jobs. They get paychecks. Therefore, it goes out into all of the economy of that city, and it lifts it up economically. And then maybe more factories join in that city, in that area, that region. And there's those supply chains and all that are shortened. And you build up this industrial base, and this is called an economy, right? And if you just lift that out of the United States or out of that one city, what happens? It doesn't take a genius to know that all those people lose their jobs. And then we move it to China, and guess what? All those Chinese get the jobs, and then they sell back the products to us. They're making tons of money everywhere, and we're really becoming a consumer base, just like we were for Great Britain We sent them our cotton, or before that, our tobacco. They sent us finished goods. We were not allowed to manufacture those goods because then we would have become a competitor, right? We would have competed with Great Britain's, and there would have been discussions on tariffs and free trade and barriers to entry. So now we have this with China, and everybody's pulling their hair out and saying, wow, China is our greatest threat. I don't know why Russia is always really lurking there. I think it's undoubtedly China. But then isn't it true that the only reason that China is our greatest military threat is that we actually created their economy and their industrial base and their manufacturing base and their tech base? We created it for them.
Yeah, you know what? Everything you said is actually entirely accurate, and I think it provides a really good skeleton. And I'd like to put some meat on the bones of that skeleton. So let's go back and just sort of look at the economy and the way you describe the economy. What you've said and what is correct is that a factory, a manufacturing base, it sort of functions like a farm or a mine because it's an anchor industry. It's an industry that anchors the economy by producing material wealth and bringing wealth into a community, right? So there's a production of something that's real and physical, and then that is exported, and then they get money in return. And a factory, mine, agriculture, towns spring up around centers of production. So these anchor industries are sort of like, the big trees in the rainforest, or they're the coral in the coral reef, because the economy is, it's an organic system. And like other organic systems, there's always sort of a base. There's an anchor for the system to build. And, manufacturing had served that purpose in America for, well over 100 years. And there's good economic research that shows that manufacturing actually has, because the supply chains are so complicated, and because manufacturing is such a sophisticated, especially modern manufacturing, it's very sophisticated processes, right? It actually supports most predicate jobs of any other anchor industry. There's been a bunch of research, and depending on what's being manufactured, each manufacturing job supports between 1.8 and 2.9 predicate jobs. These could be other supply chain manufacturing jobs. They could be service jobs, because you think about it, when you have a factory, people work in the factory. They need accountants to do their taxes. They need hairdressers,
tutors for their kids.
Exactly. Right? Mm-hmm. So these manufacturing jobs are really supporting the whole economy. And what happens when you take a factory and you just take it out of the community and you put it in China? Well, it's the exact same thing that happens when you cut down a tree in the rainforest, or you take the coral out of a coral reef. The whole ecosystem collapses. And that's what's happened to America's economy. This manufacturing, since 1979, over 6 million manufacturing jobs have been lost. And on top of that, all of the service industry jobs that they supported, well, they've also been lost, or people have been going into lower paying service jobs. Like, it's really a horrible, the whole ecosystem is dying.
Can you restate that number of jobs that were lost since 79?
Yeah. So manufacturing employment in America peaked in 1979. Since then, we've lost 6 million manufacturing jobs. And on top of that, we've lost jobs that they supported. So like I said, manufacturing usually supports between 1.8 and 2.9 predicate jobs. So we've probably lost 15 million jobs, which is crazy. And you wonder where did those go? Because the unemployment rate, it doesn't look like there's enough space for that many jobs, right? Well, the government changed the way they calculate the unemployment rate by writing a whole bunch of people out of the employable population. They said they're not in the labor force anymore. And they've done that to over 10 million people in the last 20 years. So the unemployment rate is, whatever the government says, it's like triple that. So that's where these people have gone. They're America's invisible people. They've been written out of the statistics.
I remember when they changed that. It's just sort of like when they changed SATs entirely, because the test results were going way, 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 way down. And they said, well, they didn't say, well, let's fix the problem. They said, let's just change how we measure it so that people can feel good. Because it's more important that we feel good than we actually are good. I have seen various estimates. I am shocked by, we're so overregulated and we're required to give so much information to governments, but I couldn't find one database that tracked every factory closing in the United States. And it seems weird to me that the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, and the IRS wouldn't be able to have some kind of a common database where when ABC or Apex factory that makes widgets in Omaha, Nebraska closes, that is an event that then just at least triggers a record. That's all. I'm not saying let's get draconian measures in there, but triggers a record. And I think that part of it is that they don't think it really matters whether we know or not. What they know in the bureaucracy that's important. Whether it reaches our ears and eyes is an entirely different matter. But I also think it hides things so beautifully. And I find that it's always about, they never have the statistics available or even collected often when it's something that would really tick the American people off and wake them up and say, wait a minute, I just looked at the spreadsheet and another 27 factories closed in Wisconsin this week. We're going to end this thing and, bring it to the people. But no, those numbers, I've seen 100,000 factories as one number. I've seen lower. Do you have any idea of how many factories closed in America from 1979 till today?
But you're quite correct. They don't track those numbers. So we have no idea how many specific factories closed. The best approximation that we can get is to look at the amount of GDP that's been displaced. So a lot of people don't really understand how the trade deficit works. So I'd like to just, I'd like to explain that for your listeners. So what the trade deficit is, it's the value of all of the goods and services that America purchases, the net value of goods and services that America purchases from abroad. If we're running a trade deficit, it means that we're buying a lot more than we're selling. Last year in 2024, what did we do? The trade deficit was $1.2 trillion, which means we bought more, $1.2 trillion more stuff than we sold. And the question is, how did we actually pay for that? There's only three ways that you can pay for goods. You either have to trade something for it that you made, which we did a bit of that because we ran on trade surpluses in services. So that brings the overall deficit down to $920 billion. But the rest of that, we had to pay for by selling assets. So, products that were made in the past that still retain value today, or by selling debt, which is the promise to produce something in the future. Assets are a really big problem because it's sort of like, selling grandma's wedding ring to pay for groceries. And what is an asset? It's real estate. So, for example, last year, America sold $60 billion worth of real estate. $8 billion of that was farms, about $40 billion of that was residential real estate. So you wonder why the cost of housing is going up? Well, it's because all of that money that we pay for the trade deficit is coming back and it's being pumped into the housing market. So housing prices are going up. The same thing is true of the stock market. So we're selling...
buying. So are you talking about... Give me an example to illustrate that.
Yeah. So what we have is we have an international balance of payments. Mm-hmm. Money is sort of like... it's like thermodynamic law. It's not being traded. It's not being destroyed. It's being transformed when it moves abroad, right? So when Americans in aggregate purchase goods from China, they got to pay for it somehow. They have to raise that capital to buy those goods because the Chinese aren't giving anything for free, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. So the question is, what do we trade to them in order to get the goods? We're trading our assets. So we're converting, our houses and real estate, or we're converting corporate shares into money to go and buy those products and then selling it to the Chinese, which means the Chinese are buying up America's real estate. They're buying shares in American corporations. Or we're selling debt, which is why the foreign ownership of America's debt has totally exploded. And now we're paying, now we have to pay back the principal, but we also have to pay $150 billion a year to China and friends for the privilege of buying their good. And, all of these numbers, these are known numbers. We know how many foreigners are buying real estate. And it's an astronomical amount of real estate. And then if you look at shareholders, 1 in 5 shares of businesses in America are owned by foreign companies or foreign investors. And, America's run a trade deficit every year since 1974. When you adjust it for inflation, the overall value of that, $25 trillion, which means that we've sold $25 trillion worth of assets and debts pay for the cumulative deficits over the last 50 years.
It's kind of an overwhelming conversation. But the magnitude of it is so tremendous. And what I often think about when it comes to immigration, these trade deficits, offshoring, is whoever, I don't even know how it's possible to quantify the loss to America. You gave me one piece here. You said that it's $25 trillion that we have essentially exported, given others, or traded. Phrase that again. 25
That's
trillion.
The grocery bill. That's how much products we purchased from foreign suppliers without trading them any of our own good. That's the value of America's displaced economic production.
All going out.
It all goes out, and then the money is converted and it plugged back into the stock market, the real estate market, and the debt bubble.
So they're owning all that wealth, and there's so much risk there for in a multitude of ways. Yeah. But back to my let me finish this one point. What is never calculated is the tragic costs to real human beings that are Americans. Because when I watch documentaries and news reports and all these on China, what I'm seeing is, and of course their country's a disaster, so I do want to we won't go there, but they are in a bad situation with population and many other things. But nevertheless, I see a Chinese family or a little city that now has a bunch of workers, and they have homes that they've built or they've added a new room on, and they've got food on the table, and they've got the dignity, the human dignity, because they have a good paying job that provides, it provides dignity, because work is something that humans thrive in, having, a work ethic and then working it out in their lives, and they provide for their children and all this. I'm seeing that and I'm saying, oh, that's kind of what we would call the American dream. And I'm seeing the guy who used to work in a factory, and the elitism of all this is extraordinary too, because these people don't really matter, because they're just like, hey, this guy from Podunk, he's not a public intellectual, he's not writing books, he's not doing, podcasts, he doesn't have a news organization, he's not a PhD, it's flyover country. And here's a guy who just goes to work 5 days a week. What an uninteresting life he has. Isn't that sad, right? Well, and when, that goes away, no big deal. But the reality is, here's a man whose dignity has been assaulted. Their personal wealth has been drained. Their future is at risk or destroyed. Their children are affected by it. The entire economy of that town, which then can be expanded to the whole United States, is eviscerated and devastated. But who could ever put a number to that? Is that even something you could quantify, the number of millions of Americans whose lives, in essence, have been destroyed or altered to a degrading way?
I don't think there is any way to quantify that. I mean, the human cost of offshoring is like, it's a war against the American people. It's ruined millions and millions of lives. I mean, if we look at, you can look at some basic indicators, like the number of people who are addicted to substance abuse. I mean, think about, I think last year, 70,000 people OD'd on opioids, right? And, this wasn't a thing until the massive job loss, because a lot of people, lost their jobs and turned to drugs. right? So there's a lot of, these areas that were hit hardest by offshoring and factory closures. I don't think it's a coincidence that those areas are also really hit hard by the sort of drug epidemic.
I think there's a causation there, and I think that anybody who doesn't link it, but if they're not affected by it, if you aren't living in small town America, if you're in New York and LA, and maybe now like in Texas, you're just not thinking about it. So we've got the history that Americans actually went to war with Great Britain, many of which were lawfare. I'm going to just call it lawfare. It says 18th century lawfare. But there were all kinds of oppressive measures by a bureaucratic overlord state, which is what we have, onshore now in America, and trade practices. And these are things that we're experiencing today by our own people onshore, and they're ignoring the impact. So are we in the midst of a new revolution with President Trump and his team to like a new Declaration of Independence?
I think that was the whole impetus behind Liberation Day. What President Trump said on Liberation Day is he says, look, I mean, we have the Declaration of Independence and we celebrate Independence Day because it celebrates political independence. But what President Trump, I think, is getting at, and what the founding fathers knew, is that you're not long going to have political independence if you don't have economic independence. Because if you can't actually manufacture the tools, the weapons, the chips to assert your political independence, you're not long going to keep it. And, the founding fathers knew this. George Washington, for example, in a speech he gave, he wrote, and I'll give the quote because I think it's an important quote. George Washington said, "Free people ought not only be armed, but disciplined, and their safety and their interest require that they should promote such manufacturing as tends to render them independent of others for essential and particularly military supplies." So George Washington is literally saying we have to industrialize the nation, because if we can't build firearms, how are we supposed to resist the British? And they found that out the hard way in the Revolution. The French shipped 80,000 firearms to America. They shipped swords. They shipped textiles for ships' sails, uniforms. America's independence was, like most wars, decided on the fact that we had enough war material to do it. But it wasn't the Americans producing it. It was the French and the Dutch.
Came to the rescue.
They did. The revolution couldn't have been won if there was no firearms. It's just, right. Ipso facto, right? And this is why Thomas Jefferson, he was initially opposed to the tariffs, because right after the revolution, George Washington and Congress passed the Tariff Act of 1789 on the advice of Alexander Hamilton, who wrote this amazing work. It was called The Report on Manufacture. It was published a couple of years later, but, it was in the works at that point. And he said, look, we got to industrialize. We got to be able to produce all of this stuff, or we won't be able to defend freedom. So fast forward a couple of years, we get to the War of 1812. It's it's another conflict between the British Empire and the American colonies. Thomas Jefferson, after that war, even he came around and he wrote, and I'll give you another quote. This is in a letter he wrote in 1816. He said, "Experience has taught me that manufacturing is now as necessary to our independence as to our comfort." So there you go. Even Thomas Jefferson, the liberty, free trade, even he said, look, we need tariffs because otherwise we're not going to be independent.
And again, you sense my frustration. I'm sure you have the same level of frustration or similar, that this does not require an Albert Einstein to detangle what we're looking at here. And I see these men and women in Congress and the presidents that oversaw all this moving the manufacturing or essentially creating the environment so that the move of manufacturing over to foreign nations, primarily China, was inevitable, but it was so obvious what the consequences would be. And there's always this, it seems to be this idea where some people call it like you're really kind of outsmarting yourself. You think you're so smart and you come up with this sophisticated grand scheme and idea, and ultimately you are utterly destroyed by your own creature. when we wanted to make friends with China and have them like us, and they were supposed to become a democracy. And so making China a democracy, making them not genocidal maniacs, making them not, say, an invader of Tibet and the stands and an enslaving of people and the great famines and cultural. We wanted to get them to join the community of nations, the global community of nations, and act like nice neighbors. So what we did in this grand desire to have this, because everyone that discussed this in this Senate hearing that was for it, making it permanent, was saying, but this is what's going to happen with China. They're going to see how good it is for them if they begin to, say, abide within the rules-based international order and play like gentlemen. Did that happen?
Well, I think it obviously did. It's manifestly obvious it didn't happen. I mean, China, first of all, China never played by the rules. They joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and they consequently, they just didn't play by the rules. They continued doing all of the same sorts of, they ramped it up, if anything. Right? China
and they had trade before. I'm sorry, I shouldn't, but I'll finish my interruption here. They had been trading with the United States unfairly for a decade or two or three.
I think it was 84. 82, 83 or 84. Yeah,
exactly.
We knew what was coming.
So we already knew what was happening, and they thought that this is so leftist delusion. They said, well, if we give them permanent status, it's like a self-esteem exercise, and they'll suddenly, understand. And I thought, when I'm reading this garbage swill, thinking, but they've been getting the favorable status, and they've been treating it this way unfairly, objectionably, and to our detriment. And you think that just by making it permanent, they're suddenly going to say, oh, they like us, so we're going to play patty cake, like, on the playground. Go ahead.
Well, it's like rewarding the bully or rewarding bad behavior. Mm-hmm. These are the same sorts of people that they don't spank their kids, basically, right? I mean, you think China was ripping us off. They were doing all of these horrible things, and the American government decided, let's reward them. Let's trade more with these guys. That's what they said.
There's almost like in the Middle East, like land for peace. The problem with that equation is, firstly, that it would never work because it wasn't. It just would never work because they didn't want that. But you give something tangible to the enemy to get something that, one, can disappear in an instant or never appear at all. It's a promise of peace. So here's the Sinai back to Egypt. Will they abide by that? Or let's give, the Golan Heights or this. It's always land for peace, but land is permanent and land is in your hands. And what we're always doing with China and others is saying, well, let's just nibble around the edges and we'll coax them back because they don't understand what they're doing to us. But we've established that China understands. They're being smart and we've been idiots.
Yeah, China is very smart about it. China is very smart. So China has actually returned essentially to the Canton system of trade, which, they had perfected centuries before the Opium Wars. The readers or the listeners have probably heard of these, the Opium Wars. They were a series of conflict in the 1800s between Great Britain and later other European powers and China. And the reason these Opium Wars were fought is because the Chinese system of trade required. So China was the biggest manufacturing power back then, and they were manufacturing all sorts of, textiles. They were exporting tea, fine China products, clocks, all sorts of cool stuff that the Europeans wanted. But the Chinese didn't want anything from Europe. What they wanted was silver. And eventually the silver ran out. And the Europeans, the British, they decided, well, what are we going to do? We don't have any silver, but we want the Chinese product. So they started smuggling opium into China from India. They started smuggling drugs into the country. as payment for these products. And there was obviously the Chinese government didn't want a population that was addicted to opioids any more than America's government ought want people addicted to opioids. So they waged a war with Great Britain, and of course, Great Britain won that war. It opened up China for trade, and consequently, China's manufacturing sector ended up being gutted by the British, because the British were just on the cusp of this manufacturing revolution, the Industrial Revolution. So they had all of these really cheap goods that flooded the Chinese market, and that began for China this sort of century of defeat. Right? And so China remembers this. China has a very long memory. They remember when they were on top of the world with the Canton system. They remember how the Western powers broke China through military action and the smuggling in of drugs, destroyed China's manufacturing base, and basically turned China into like an agricultural backwater. They remember this, and now they're doing the same thing to us. I mean, they're smuggling drugs into America, and they're getting America to export soybeans and other agricultural products, where they're exporting manufactured goods. So right now, China wants to be Great Britain in the 1800s.
That's what it sounds like. That's what
they want.
They want
America to be a resource colony.
What is happening? Well, there's so many statistics. I think, to me, it really matters, the numbers. And so you said you weren't sure about, we could look at the GDP. We couldn't really know the number of factories that were closed down and sent to China. But do you think 100,000 or 60,000, 85,000 is there kind of a good number that we could look at as reasonable, a fair guess?
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to go about this would be to look at the value of the trade deficit every year, because that's the value of displaced production. So what we've done is we've displaced $920 billion worth of economic production abroad. If there was no trade whatsoever, those factories would be here. So the question would be, how many jobs, how many factories does it take to make almost $1 trillion worth of economic production? As it turns out, quite a lot, probably, 5 to 10 million jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of, the best estimate that we're going to get is to take a look at what the value of the trade deficit is. That's the value of the displaced production. And then from that, we can estimate, well, how many factories does that actually, how many factories is that? How many jobs is that? How many communities would that support? And I think it's quite a lot.
Would you be in favor of moving forward that the government at least keeps accurate record, not to be punitive, not to require, some tremendous regulation, but when a factory closes down, is offshored or even reshored again, that we would know the name of that factory, what they produced, and what we've lost or what we've regained? Wouldn't that make sense?
I bet an AI bot could figure that out for us, because those factory closures are all going to be in the newspapers and things like that. So I bet we could do a deep dive using, using
sophisticated
DeepSeek
AI. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is all very real, and in other words, it's not just numbers, it's not just words, it's real people, it's real money, and we've been told that we can't reshore. I remember, of course, that quote of Obama. I think it was during a debate, that ship sailed.
I remember that.
Yeah. The ship sailed. We're never going to reshore manufacturing. And then just today, I was listening to somebody, probably on CNN or other news organization like that, and they were saying, well, that would take years to reshore all of those companies, those manufacturing facilities, and it's just going to be pain and difficulty and hardship. Now, whether there is or not, we could talk about that. But if we could go and offshore them and put people onto the breadlines or unemployment, or tell them go pick lettuce or something, if whatever we have to do, if it's the right thing to do, even if it takes 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or however many years, in the long term, because, we have to look beyond the next election, the midterms, or the next presidential election. What is best for the American people? Can you talk about that idea?
Yeah. I mean, this is a question of time horizons. And the problem is that America's time horizons are very, very short. Companies are looking at the next quarter. Election cycles are, every 2 years. We got president election, are also very short term. So this short-termism is really prioritizing the maximization of consumption right now, as opposed to consumption in the future. Because obviously you can't consume what you don't produce. You can't eat what you don't grow. You can't reap what you don't sow. And this is, so we need to have a long-term investment strategy in America. And the long-term investment strategy is to make sure that we have the manufacturing capabilities here. Problem is it's a long-term investment. So there's a lot of money to be made in selling the country for scrap. There's not a lot of money to be made, at least immediately, in investing in capital. And that's why we need the tariffs, because it changes the economic incentive structure in such a way that companies are now forced to invest in America, right? Because, America's got the biggest consumer market in the world.
By far.
And people want access, by far. And people want access to that market. And tariffs are now the price to get into the market. It's pay to play now, right? So if you're going to if you want to sell your products in America, you got to make them in America, which means there's going to be capital investment in America, which means there's going to be jobs, which means ultimately that's going to benefit the consumer market as well. Because obviously people who are on welfare aren't big spenders, right? So this is so what tariffs are going to do is they're going to institute a self-fueling cycle of capital accumulation and technological investment and technological creation, right? This is going to be a virtuous cycle. It's going to make America rich in the long run. But there's going to be a couple of years probably of economic dislocation, pain, and adjustment. And, some sectors are going to really be helped in the short term by tariffs. Others are going to be hurt. So there's going to be some economic dislocation. But just like any other organic system, it's no pain, no gain, right?
Well, when they offshored, there was economic consequences and hardships. So they were willing to offshore billions of dollars of manufacturing facilities, trillions of dollars, and all of those jobs for real people. And that, I guess, maybe, and this is, I guess, goes to how do you measure the pain and the gain? If everything is based on the stock market and, whether it goes up or down, and whether they're feeling comfortable and warm and fuzzy because the corporations are always increasing in their wealth, and we're not looking at the wealth of, we're not even using that as a metric, really taking it seriously every day when you're looking at the financial news or any news. Here you've got, the S&P, you've got the stock market here. It's up by this, it's down by that, the weekend closing. But is that the right way to measure the wealth of America? How would you measure it, the wealth of America?
Yeah, I think it's I think the stock market is a terrible barometer of the economic health of the nation in the short term. I think there's correlation in the long term. But you have to remember, when we purchase goods from abroad and we run a really large trade deficit, that money comes back directly into the stock market and into real estate and into bonds. So the stock market actually is being inflated by the trade deficit. And it's really interesting if you think about it. If America were to offshore 50% of its GDP, let's say America produces $30 trillion worth of GDP. And let's say that we just offshored $15 trillion worth of GDP, and we were able to purchase all of those goods from China next year. America's economy would be gutted. We'd lose half of all of our jobs. Like the economy would be a bombed out ruin. But do you know what would happen to all that money? We'd have to sell all of the assets and real estate and debt to buy it. And assuming that they did, all of that money would pour back into what? The stock market. If we shut down America's economy, cut it in half, and bought all the goods from China, assuming China sold those goods, it would be the biggest stock market boom in the history of the world. The stocks would go up by, overnight, they would go up 10 times. So the thing is that the stock market actually benefits from offshoring because the money is being poured into the stock market. So, these financial interests benefit by selling America for scrap.
It's crazy. And so when I saw that at the very beginning of this discussion about the tariffs during the administration, not during the campaign, and what I was hearing from some voices was, look, do you see how Trump is not, as in the first administration, watching the stock market and using that as its barometer of whether it is being successful in its activities to boost our economy. The first term, he's looking at the stock market and saying, look, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. Look at us, we're doing a great job. And then with the tariffs, I'm sure in discussions, they're all talking about, well, that's not going to be what we're going to see up, up, up. We're going to see down or volatility. So therefore, that's not what we should be looking at. And I was very encouraged about it. I'm no financial genius. I'm just, I'm a layperson just listening and learning from others. And it seems to me that I'm hoping that he's not going to capitulate at all. But what's your assessment of the way we should be measuring the economy, what Trump's looking at and his team, and how it's all working out, and will he capitulate?
Mm-hmm. I agree. The stock market is not the barometer that we should be looking at because the stock market is inflated by selling out America. So we have to look to other metrics, and what are some of those metrics going to be? I think in the short term, what we should be looking at is, the amount of investment. How many investments are being, how much money and investment is being poured into the country. That's a good barometer of the health of the nation because it means we're accumulating capital and we're going to be creating jobs not just now, but in 2 years from now, 5 years from now. I think that's a really important metric. Let's look at employment. How many jobs do we create? Let's look at the purchasing power, not just of, not the average purchasing power, because that's skewed up by, these billionaires who are profiting, off of selling America. Let's look at the median wage. What happened to median wages? Because over the last 50 years, median wages actually went down for most people. Let's look at the quality of products that Americans are buying. One thing, so the consumer price index is the way that we calculate inflation. And the consumer price index, basically, what they do is they have a basket of goods, and they go out throughout the country and they measure the cost of items in the basket of goods. And they say, if it went up next year, or next month, inflation went up. But one of the things that they do when they're calculating the inflation rate is they actually substitute good. So, 50 years ago, cooking fat would have been butter and lard. Today, the cooking fat category is, it's vegetable oil, it's seed oil. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. If you actually took the same basket of goods that people were buying to measure inflation back in the 1970s, you would find that the purchasing power it's not just stayed the same for the median people. It's actually cratered because people are substituting high quality foods and high quality products for low quality garbage that's making them fat, giving them diabetes, and it's giving them cancer.
Wow. That's a really interesting insight there. So I don't even know
I'll give
where
you some statistics.
Yeah.
Let me give you some more stats because I think people are going to be really interested in this. So this is what's in the book. This is in Reshore. I've got a whole chapter of the book that's dedicated to sort of the non-economic harms that's caused by offshore. But think about the decline in red meat consumption. So from the 1970s until today, people are eating 30% less red meat. They're eating 78% less whole milk, 13% fewer eggs. Animal fats like lard have gone down by 27%, butter's down 9%. On the other side of the equation, consumption of vegetable and seed oils has gone up by 87%. We're substituting high-quality animal fats for just poison. It's motor oil. And then grains has gone up by 28%. Cereals, right? So we've replaced the traditional English-American breakfast of, your meat and eggs. We've replaced it with cereals, and that's causing...
Which is garbage. Which is garbage.
It's garbage. And you think the cereals, for example, the Kellogg's and cereals were literally designed as prison food to make people weak. And we're eating that for breakfast.
And our children, a third or more of them are pre-diabetic. How is that? I mean, and so we could get RFK Jr. on here. And
we can't afford to eat like we used to.
And we think of ourselves as this economy, this people. I don't want to call us an economy, and I'm sick of it. We're human beings. But as a people that have been able to eat meat when, in foreign countries, they've had to eat the cheap, less nutritious. They're shorter. Their lives are shorter. They're not as healthy. And now we've actually done that. And none of these things are out in the open. We don't actually, our government that should, because obviously they're part of the problem, but shouldn't the average Joe know what these consequences have been? This is where this transparency is really a huge issue to me, because eggs and beef, by the way, not meat made out of bugs like Bill Gates wants us to have, and butter and real fats are healthy for you. And by the way, all of those things that told us don't eat meat, don't eat eggs, don't eat salt, don't eat fats, all that stupid food pyramid has all been dismantled as a lie. And that is, since the food pyramid, that is where we all got fat, and America's health precipitously declined. So, wow, I have to give some thought to that. I can't wait. This book, I cannot wait. Look, I'll tell you what I think about this book. And it was before Bannon said it, but I know how Bannon thinks this is a very, very important book. One of the reasons, and before it came out and got to the shelves, I thought this is a book that is going to be able to lay out the arguments. It's a primer on what we've experienced, what we are currently facing, and it arms us with the tools to be able to understand and therefore articulate the truth, because it seems like the Democrat Party and certain kinds of Republicans still have no idea what they're talking about, or still want to be the mouthpieces of, I don't know, is it corporate America that is the enemy here? I mean, I don't want them to be the enemy. I'm just saying, is that kind of who the enemy is?
I mean, it's cui bono, who profit, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we know who's profiting. The money is being poured into the real estate market, it's being poured into the stock market, and it's being poured into bond. So, entities that own a lot of those assets, whether they're an investment bank or rich individuals, benefit tremendously from the trade deficit, tremendously. So you just follow the money. Who's
the
making
stock market is the last place we should look to determine whether or not things are going well. And either ignorance or duplicity is what is driving the narrative out there. And your narrative is important. That's why I want to have you come on more frequently and following discussions, maybe more targeted. Let's look at the rest of your book, what you've laid out in your book. Kind of give an overview from this beginning where we're talking about the historical area, and then we, of course, went everywhere else, but walk me through the rest of it.
Yeah, so here's what's in the book. The book is divided into 3 parts, 9 chapters. The first part of the book, or the first 3 chapters, is just outlining what's happened to America's economy over the last 50 years. The first chapter, I deal with the unemployment rate. And I go through and I sort of calculate the unemployment rate afresh. And I say, look, the unemployment rate is fake. And the reason for that is because they're moving all of these people from the category of employable people into the not in labor force category. And we go through some of the numbers and we quantify how many people have been unfairly taken out of the labor force, how many people are, working part-time when they prefer to work full-time. So
participation rate, right?
Exactly. Uh-huh. So we go through and we look at the unemployment rate, and we show historically the unemployment rate was this. After 1974, when we started running the trade deficit, it's a lot higher, and it's way higher than the government says. After that, we look at the effects of that unemployment and how it cascades through the economy. And what it does is it drives down wages for people. significantly. So we look at purchasing power of people. We look at, inflation. We look at visible inflation, so cost of goods, but we also look at invisible inflation. That is, quality of goods is lower. People are substituting out high quality food for low quality food. I have a section in the book where I look at, for example, the quality of construction of appliances. And we look at how, appliances don't work like they used to, and you end up buying the same thing 2 or 3 times, right? So we're getting a really raw deal. They say we're getting cheap. They say that we're getting cheap goods. What they mean is that we're getting cheaply made good, right? So after that, I look at the effect on the industry of America. So what happened to America's industry? It's been hollowed out. I look at why that's a problem, right? So we're not making things. For example, we don't make enough ball bearings. Ball bearings are like in everything, right? You need them, and we're not making enough silicone chips. The machines that we need to make silicone chips, they're called these photolithography machines. We don't make those in America. Those come from the Netherlands. They export them from the Netherlands to Taiwan, and then we buy the chips. America's not even in the process anymore, which is crazy. The second part of the book, I tie it together to the trade deficit. And I say, look, we have, 50 years of economic dislocation and bad problems. What's causing that? And we talk about, the trade deficit and how it all fits together, basically. And I sort of frame it like a Sherlock Holmes mystery, right?
Moriarty
and we're pulling exactly. We're pulling on the scarlet thread, and we're seeing, what's causing everything. And the scarlet thread of this is the trade deficit. And then I go into, some of the non-economic harms, and this is where we talk about the food supply and how it's affecting our health. How it affects the sovereignty of America, right? Because when you have economic integration, you're also going to have political harmonization and political integration. That's what's happened in the European Union. The European Union started as a free trade agreement, and look at it today, right? And that's what they want for America.
Who would that be with? Dig down into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so I mean, look at NAFTA, right? So NAFTA, they said it's going to be a free trade agreement. NAFTA ended up having 10,000 pages of regulations, and it harmonized all sorts of it harmonized the laws of America, Canada, and Mexico. And when a state law or when a provincial law, goes against what NAFTA says, NAFTA supersedes your state or your provincial or your federal law. NAFTA is like above the Constitution in a lot of ways, right? It's an international law. So what America has done is by entering into these international agreements, we've outsourced our own legal system to, international arbitrators or bureaucrats or whoever it may be. And that's what happened in the European Union. That's what these globalists want for America. They want a European Union, but for North America or the Western Hemisphere. So the last part of the book, I really get into how do we fix this? How does economic growth actually work? And I take issue with a lot of the economic models that have been proposed. And I break down why, all of these economic models of growth that have been proposed are wrong. And the reason they're wrong is because economic growth is actually exogenous to the model, meaning that when people say they understand economic growth, they're not actually speaking directly about how the economy is. And then I outline my thesis as to how the economy grows, which is economic growth is simply a function of technological growth. It's making more stuff or better quality stuff. And the only way to do that in the long run is to improve our technology, right? And then the question turns to, well, how do we increase technology? And a big part of that is making sure that we have all of the supply chains and the biggest amount of economic production that we can within our borders, and that's where tariffs come in. Tariffs are a tried and true method shoring up and reshoring the economy such that we can expose ourselves to the maximum amount of economic opportunity in the long run. So that's how everything ties together.
I love it. I absolutely love it. When I was looking at J.D. Vance making that speech, and I keep thinking I'm going to look up the name of the event. I think it was in Washington, and it was about industrial dynamism, if I'm saying it right. Do you remember? Maybe you can say it.
I know the speech, yeah.
There's certain words that my tongue can't produce. Anyway, and that 20-minute speech I said the other day was filled with 40 minutes of information. He really made it chock full. But so those clips went around where he was actually, I think, poking in the eye of those who want to offshore and saying that, creating a better, healthier, fatter bottom line, you could do it either through innovation and constantly, increasing the quality of your product, the scope of your product or new products, and with new ideas. This is what America's about: creativity, questioning things, and coming up with new solutions. That is one of our assets. Not everybody has that. And we could do it that way, or we could say, okay, well, we want to increase the bottom line. Let's cut labor force costs, right? So let's offshore and all this, which is, again, a completely forget the truth of the economy, but it is so utterly heartless. And I will say this, for all these manufacturers, they have to compete against each other. So I understand when 5 go, the 3 that are left, they're having to compete with the guys that have slave labor, essentially, doing the work and bringing it back in. So you can't blame all the manufacturers equally. You can blame the entire government, and there are blameworthy individuals. But it is like looking at the country where the only place on earth that could give you the soil to till and to sow into, you brought up that analogy, and to produce the brilliance and the economics and the genius and everything of their company, their prosperity, flourishing, and all the people that are part of it, Americans, your brethren, your brothers, your American brothers and sisters, you say, oh, to heck with them. I want to make that bottom line better. America gave me everything I needed to be great. Now I'm going to go and make China great and my bottom line. I have a question for you. When they talk about how offshoring is so good for productivity and levels, and I think clearly what you're measuring is not what probably an American would measure. Does this mean that they're saying we get richer, America gets richer when they offshore because of all those corporations with the fatter bottom line, and we just ignore the fact that the unemployment and the poverty and the drugs and the welfare and all the rest of it is actually not in that equation? We just ignore it.
Yeah, I think people need to understand that price is not the same thing as value, and it's not the same thing as the costs, right? I mean, you can get a low priced product from China at a high price, at a high cost, but you're just paying the cost through, the social dislocation, through the bigger government that comes in when people lose their job and go on welfare. When China pollutes the environment, and that acid falls down on our forest farm.
Oh,
right?
That's true.
These are called externalities, right? So what we do is when we're offshoring to China, we're supposedly getting goods at a low price. Problem is that the price doesn't bake in the actual cost, right? There's all these costs that are externalized on society and on the environment and on the human condition that are not baked into the price of goods from China. And if they were, the price would be a lot higher than an American good, because American factories are actually more efficient than Chinese factories.
Why is that?
Problem is because American factories are efficient because we have good workers with good knowledge. We have a lot of capital that's been accumulated over time. There's a lot of efficiency there. It's efficient to transport goods within America as opposed to intercontinentally. I mean, I saw a product at the supermarket the other day, and it's pears. It was pears that were grown in South Africa. The pears were shipped to like Vietnam, and then packaged and cut in Vietnam, and then shipped here. So these pears made it all the way from South Africa to Vietnam, back to I live in Alberta, but back to America, and it's like these pears traveled 12,000 miles to get here. Like what are we doing?
We can grow pears.
We can grow pears. And you know what? We can make forks, and we can make cars, and we can make silicone chips, right? We can make anything that we want.
I love China. Like, in other words, I was raised where, Sunday or whatever day, when you get out the fine china, you get out your silver flatware, you have your, and you have candles. That's just how I was raised. We were poor, but we were raised where, it doesn't matter how much money you have certain things that you invest in as a family. By the way, I have like china sets from like 5 aunts, and grandmas, because, it's like it came down to me. But the point is that I went to go look at China in America. By that, I mean China ware.
Porcelain stuff.
Yeah, porcelain and things like this. And I could not believe that our all-American brands were now made in China, like Lennox. These brands were all shipped to China. So if you wanted to, it doesn't matter. I won't go down into that rabbit hole. When I buy a toaster, I would rather spend $60 on a toaster that would last until I die. And by the way, I have some of the appliances of my grandmother and, great aunts and things like this. I have them. And they still work, and they're 50, 60, 70 years old. And the reality is that it's part of this consumerism of America, this insatiable consumerism. I know that there are many facets to the cause of it, but maybe part of it is when you bring the quality of goods down, it becomes very, very disposable. It's cheap to get. It's cheap to replace. I don't have any things that I just say, oh, you know what, just throw this away and I'll get a new one. And in the old days, you went down to the appliance shop and you had it repaired. And I'm not saying I want to go back to Mayberry RFD, even though there's some good stuff with Opie and Andy Taylor. I'm saying that if I could spend $60 on an American-made toaster and have it for 30 years, because there's no reason that it shouldn't last for 30 years. And I knew my neighbor or somebody in another state, a community, was thriving because they were making these wonderful toasters and all the jobs that, by the way, they might start buying something from me and others. So it's like keeping it in the family. It's like a family business. It's a family, compound is America. Or I can buy it for $30 after we make this worldwide thing starting in China. Maybe we send some stuff there. They send things there. It goes to different places. It gets back to me. Yeah, I got 30, but I have to buy 3 of them over a period. I got it for $30, but I got to buy 3 of them over a course of 30 years.
You get it.
And my peeps, my family in Nebraska or Ohio, wherever else, they're on unemployment.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And this is why the best thing that anybody can do is buy local, buy as local as possible, buy local food, buy local production if you can. There's lots of great companies that, you got to find. They're hard to find because they're local, but if you do, you're going to get better quality products. And, you want to buy something once. It's better to save up the money and buy something once than buy something cheap and buy it 4 times. Because at the end of the day, you bought it 4 times, you paid more, and you didn't get as good a quality product, and you probably don't even like it, right? This is why I say don't buy the IKEA couch. Just save up, buy the couch you like, buy something that's handmade in America. You got to wait for it, and that's okay. You got to delay gratification. But then you're going to have a beautiful piece of furniture that you can pass down to your kids, as opposed to going through, 2 or 3 or 4 cheap garbage couches.
People throw things away. I literally have couches from, she would be probably 125 years old now, my great aunt Hazel, and I have her stuff, and I have my great-great-grandparents' things. This wedding ring was from, my grandparents that came from Sweden, but you buy quality and it lasts. And, people don't hand furniture down anymore. My kids will get that because that's a tradition in our family. My mother and her 2 younger sisters and her elder brother, they were raised in Omaha, Nebraska. They lived in a house as big as this card, right? I mean, it's adorable. It looks like a cute little house. My grandmother would say, girls, they're poor. Go out, get 3 nice outfits and buy it from a nice store. Quality, the matching shoes, the coat, the whole thing. And all their friends would buy this cheap junk and they would have a beautiful outfit, but only 3, but so what? And so the quality, really does make a difference. They look like $1 million and they didn't have like 14 outfits, but okay, let me ask you about this. And I know we're running a little long here. We have a situation where the China, part of the non-tariff trade barriers, and I've been told over and over again that the non-tariff trade barriers are the worst and the most egregious harms to America. And I want to bring up one in particular. And that is when a manufacturer, I don't know what other kinds of businesses, moves to China, in part or all, I don't know, you could explain it, that the Chinese government requires by law them to go into partnership with a Chinese company. That, and I don't know what the percentage, like, do they have to, is it 20%, 50%? I don't know. You could maybe tell us that as well. In the package with that is that trade secrets, intellectual property, patents. I don't know about anything to do with trademarks or anything like that, but patents. So we're talking about technology and like you talked about, the British didn't want us to have blueprints exported to us in 1770 or 75. China wants to own the very thing that makes the company profitable and successful. And that, then my next step is, I'm calling it a barrier to exit instead of a barrier to entry. The barrier to exit is you've just created your own competition. If you're manufacturing widgets, the best widgets in the world, you've given all of your plans and blueprints and even patents maybe to your Chinese partner. You want to come home because you realize what a traitor you've been to your country and your people. You want to come home because of all this. Can you come home? Because now you've got you built your competitor. So walk me through that, what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a really good job of outlining how it worked. So when an American company wants to go and manufacture something in China, they have to partner with a Chinese company. So they set up a clone company. And the American or, whoever's investing in China, whether it's an American or a European or a Canadian, they have to partner with the Chinese company, and they have to train the Chinese workers how to make the product. They have to train the engineers because Americans don't go on work in China to do this, right?
No.
The Chinese insist that it's Chinese workers and Chinese executives that handle all of this. So we go in there and we train them to make the product, whatever the product is. Let's say it's silicone chips. So we get the technology in there. We got to show them how to build the technology, how to service the technology, and we got to show them how to build the product. And now what happens is that they have their workers in there making, learning how to make the products and making the products for 20 years. After a certain point, the Chinese, they just decide, well, I can make my own product now. I don't really need the American company, so I'm going to make my own brand. And I'll give you a really good example. So I'm in the market right now for a piano. I want to buy a piano.
I agree.
And I wanted, right? I wanted a piano, right? I wanted to relearn piano. I played when I was a kid. So I went to the piano store, and the guy at the piano store, he says, Spencer, you got a few options. You don't want a handmade Steinway because it's way too expensive. But let's get you in with a Boston. It's a manufactured piano, but it got it's a good quality piano. And then he said, you could also get this one, and I forget the name, but and I said, what is that? He says, well, this is China's version. I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, and he explained this to me. He said, well, they were manufacturing all these pianos in China, and the Chinese learned how to manufacture the pianos, and they just decided, let's make our own piano making company. So now we're importing all of these Chinese-made pianos, And he played them, and the Chinese pianos are really good. They're almost the same because they stole everything. The same guy who's making the American piano or the European piano is the same guys who are making these Chinese pianos because we gave them all the technology. And now they've decided, well, now we're not going to just make their pianos. We're also going to design and build our own pianos and take an even bigger share of the market. So they did that with pianos, but they've also done that with everything else. They're doing that with silicon chips. Huawei is the biggest example of this. We taught the Chinese how to manufacture smartphones, and now they've built Huawei, which is, a massive manufacturer of smartphones, right? We taught them how to do that, and now they're out competing us in global markets. Like, you think people in Africa want to buy iPhones? They can't afford iPhones. They're buying Huawei. So we literally fed a dragon, and now we're fighting the dragon.
How do manufacturers reshore if they've already signed these agreements? They've built up their competitor. They've trained the employees. They're not bringing the Chinese here to work for us. So is this going to be a barrier to exit and reshoring for American companies? Is there a solution to this?
Well, it's going to be tough. But right now, I mean, this is sort of like the last exit off of the highway to economic ruin. Okay, it's like, the road to serfdom.
Yes,
the road to serfdom is actually offshoring, and we're at the last branch here where we have an exit ramp. Because right now, America manufactures enough of sort of every product that it's still possible to create mass market versions of the products. Because right now we've sort of outsourced a lot of the lower end products, and we're in the process of outsourcing production of higher end products. But you can still buy like American made gloves or forks. They're just going to be the high quality stuff. But there's going to come a time, and that time is going to come really soon, where we don't even manufacture the high end stuff. And at that point, it's going to be very much, very, very difficult to actually reshore, because we're going to lose all of the human capital, the human talent, the knowledge about how to make these things. So if we don't do the reshoring right now, we might never be able to do it. Because right now it's still possible to manufacture low quality fork, because we can, there's brands that are making high quality stuff. They can come out with a lower model, right? That's not going to be possible in 10 years when they've offshored as well. So this is like the last chance we've got. If we don't do it now, it's never going to happen.
And there's that undercapacity I've read in that there are manufacturers right now. So this is a little bright spot too. It's not that everybody has to come buy a new factory or build a new factory and do all new machinery or whatever it's going to take. We didn't even talk about robotics, but which I see as a very positive thing. Not that I'm an expert, my gut tells me that this is a real positive thing. But there's a lot of undercapacity in American manufacturing facilities here. So they can close potentially those facilities that they had in China and just ramp up and expand here in America, but they've already got a base still left here. I'm concerned about the time. There's a couple of things I do want to ask. The 15% corporate tax. I don't know how much you can speak to this, but I'm very, very concerned that that 15% is going to be given to companies that are unworthy of receiving it. That may be the way it's being written out in the tax code, that there are loopholes or gestures or carve-outs that should not be there. And so can you give me any solace? Can you give me any insight into what's it? Give me some hope that we're not messing up this 15% corporate tax rate for manufacturers who should be bringing their stuff back here.
Well, I don't have expertise on the tax code.
Well, that was a big part of Donald Trump saying is that one way we're going to reshore is if you don't reshore, you're not going to get this 15% corporate rate, which is far reduced from the higher corporate.
Yeah. So here's the deal. There is going to be abuse. There's always abuse. Every single time you don't have just a straight flat tax across the board, it's going to be subject to abuse, and there's going to be political gamesmanship surrounding it, right? Sure. It's like tax gerrymandering. So you're absolutely going to get that. The question is the program still worth it even with the abuse? And then, frankly, I think time will tell. I think it's very difficult to actually predict whether or not that's true, because there's lots of tax breaks programs that are good, even if they are being abused a little, right? Because a tax break's a tax break. It's good. But I think we're going to have to see over time how it actually shakes out.
Well, let me ask you this. When an American company, I always say widgets, but I think I'll use silicone chips, because then at least I sound like I'm not working in the, 1900s or something,
Yeah,
widgets.
the doohickey factory, right?
The doohickey factory. So silicone chips, American manufacturer, they think they're American manufacturer, but really they're foreigners. To me, I think we should just say that if you reach a certain percentage of your company that is really just foreign-based, and it should be like the threshold should be conducive to their reshoring, that you should be considered a foreign manufacturing firm. I don't think you're an American company anymore, and we should treat you like a foreign company. But my point is, are they going to get the tariffs if they're manufacturing in China today, even though they're an American company and their profits supposedly come back on shore? Will they get the tariffs that Trump is putting on China?
My understanding, and things are changing really rapidly. Like, it's crazy. Every day there's something that's changed. But my understanding is that if you're manufacturing abroad, if you're importing a product into the country, that product will be subject to tariffs.
Okay, good.
And I think that's the only fair way to actually do it.
Absolutely. I don't care if you're American.
If you start carving out exemptions and this and that, you're not going to actually solve the problem of offshoring. You're just going to say it's okay if American companies offshore. But you know what? It's not okay if any company is offshore, because that's what's destroying America.
Do you think, okay, I'm a maximalist on some things. I think that no company that calls itself an American company should offshore at all. I think that they may have a foreign office, where they've got some executives or managers where they're, working on trade and whatever, sourcing maybe minerals or whatever. There's a good reason to have representatives in foreign countries. But is that crazy for me to say? Because I think a lot of people say, well, that's crazy, Elizabeth. How could you say no American should offshore? Why should anybody offshore?
Well, if we want to get really technical, there's a couple of sort of sub-definitions we need to get into. So if we can go over for another 5 minutes, I can explain that.
Okay, before we do that, because if I don't get this one thing in, and you're going to say, I got to go, and then I'm going to kick myself.
I'll budget time. This is a very productive conversation. and I love your publication, so I'm happy to speak.
Thank you so much. I have said this so many times. I can't even sleep through some nights because of the not illegal immigration. I know Tom Homan, heartthrob Tom Homan, is taking care of it, and Christy, no. I'm talking about so-called legal immigration, visas, the service industry, which years ago when they said we're going to be a service economy, all I could think of is waitresses. Like, why do we all want to do nails and be waitresses? I don't understand why you're saying we're going to ship your manufacturing off to another country and you all can go into low-paying service jobs. That didn't make sense.
Go drive Uber.
Yeah, okay, good, great. And but then what I'm finding out is that in this realm of service, they're also talking about tech service. And then what's interesting is, as we're importing foreigners to do our tech jobs for some reason, lower wages, and we're outsourcing to India, I don't know if we're outsourcing to China for tech, industry stuff. But we're saying, oh, well, the manufacturing was gone and you were supposed to go into the service industry. And so everybody was supposed to retrain. The longshoreman was supposed to go and learn to code. And then now we are importing foreign workers, which is offshoring by another name. And we're offshoring industries that are tech industries. So now if you did that, well, firstly, you're not getting those jobs, but if you did that, you're essentially going to now have, what industry do we have left if we've lost service industry, which I'm calling the tech industry, and I'll add customer service. So this is my passion at this company, that we're all in on this. The big question I have that is grinding on me is the Chip Makers Act. We've seen President Trump bring the Taiwanese billionaire, no doubt, who manufactures, if not all, but a huge proportion of the Taiwan's semiconductor chips that are exported back to America, which is insane that they've been there all this time. And if China takes over Taiwan, one more thing that China dominates and we lose. So this is absolutely critical as an existential issue. But this is where I think the rub is. This is where I think the fine print is really ugly. They're going to be bringing over their people, but I mean, their industry. But I know from behind the scenes that there is an act called the Chip Makers Visa. It's not an act yet. I don't know if it is. It's probably a regulation. Chip Makers Visa. And what they want to do is onshore the plant, but then onshore import foreigners through this Chip Makers Act to do the work. So it's all smoke and mirrors. We get a building. So great, construction workers, you've got a little bit of a heyday where you build some of this stuff, the power, I don't know, whatever. There are some jobs that come from it, but we bring in 100,000 Indians or Taiwanese and Indians, and now, what is this? Is there a guarantee that when they're reshoring, they're not onshoring foreigners to do the jobs that America should be doing, whether it's building cars or whether it's building chips?
Yeah, I did hear about that. I mean, first of all, it's obviously an enormous problem. And I think people are coming up with a lot of clever ways to try to avoid the tariffs. I think it also speaks, though, to a more sort of global issue, and that is the issue that we are actually losing the human capital that we need to produce things, right? And I think there's a legitimate question as to whether or not, if we're reshoring certain industries, especially high-tech stuff that maybe we don't do a lot of, are there actually enough Americans that know how to do the job? I mean, that's an open question.
I've talked to people about,
right?
I will say this because I don't want it to go by. I don't want it to go by this one thing. I've talked to people. I'm not a tech person, so I have to listen to what others are telling me. And they say, listen, we're talking about learning to manufacture, do your part in the assembly line of whatever it takes to manufacture a chip. And it is a learned skill. It's tiny. It sounds really so sophisticated, much more than learning to manufacture hammers in an assembly, or toasters, okay? But what makes us think with 16 million able-bodied, well, maybe it's 7.2 million able-bodied men, and maybe the entire population of those that are not considered unemployed, but are just no longer in the job market, according to our new stupid way of counting unemployment, there are tens of millions, let's put it that way, tens and tens of millions of Americans. Have we taken the dumb pill? Do you think this diet has literally made all Americans stupider than Chinese and Indians, who live, by the way, in poverty and pollution and degradation extraordinarily? How is it that we feel that we could not be doing this? It's learning to manufacture, but it's using little tiny tools, or it's using robots.
Yeah, it's operating the equipment. So here's the deal: America has a vast untapped reserve of human capital that's kind of been put on the shelf for the last 2 decades. There's no question that we have the human capital to do it. The American people are going to rise to the occasion. I think in the short term, it it might be the case where we have to bring in some foreign workers to train Americans how to do it
Only
temporarily, which is like what the Chinese did.
3 months.
But they got to leave, right? Because this can't be a backdoor for immigration, right? But I mean, you think if we've never manufactured a chip, we might have to bring in people that teach us how to manufacture the chip, and that's totally okay. But it's got to be temporary, and they got to go, because this is not a scheme to bring in more people via immigration.
I think it's really important, and that's what is happening.
We can't let that happen.
We can't let it happen. I'll tell you what: if you want to write a story on WND, do a little investigation into this chip maker's visa, which is an assault on American workers. I could learn to make a chip. I know I can.
That's what it's all about. It's low-cost wages. They want to bring people in to do jobs at a low cost, or they want to export the jobs and get them done at a low cost there. Because these guys understand that water is like, money is like water, right? It flows downhill until all the levels are equal. And America has a high ground. So what they want to do is they're taking away the tariff dams and they're letting the water spill out. And the American workers are going to, either way, if you're competing with jobs with Chinese people in China, or you're competing with jobs by people who are brought to America on H-1B visa, you're now competing with global markets. And guess what? Global markets are way, way cheaper than American markets. So there's only downside potential for American workers.
Let me ask you this. Don't you consider the fact, like we talk about free markets, and I've seen Indians, because they're at most at risk here. China and India is most at risk in all this conversation if we go the right way. And so they're very, very worried. I watch a lot of Indian YouTube channels, and I do the work so you don't have to. Anyway, I'm watching the Indian channel.
I think we appreciate that.
It is mind-boggling, not because of the Indians, but I'm just saying that everything, they're literally talking how to game the H-1B system and, use other visas, and don't disclose that you want to go in to high-tech, you don't want to go into bioengineering of this human cell and things like this. So they're telling him what not to say. It's very, very enlightening. But let me say this, that India is most at risk. And if we are now looking at an economy where we are bringing in Indians to do the jobs, that's still the same thing as if we just moved the jobs overseas. So it's entirely the same thing.
Worse.
It's worse because
they're going to bring their families. They're going to be here on,
right.
It's going to be chain migration, right?
It's chain migration. And so we have to talk about this, and we have to make a difference. And part of it is being unwilling to train. Our industries or our corporations are actually spending, Bill Gates particularly, billions of dollars now to train uneducated Indian workers to do AI. They're promising this, that they're going to spend billions in India training Indians. And I'm thinking, okay, I know this, here we are, rocket science, Bill, let me give you an idea. Instead of sending the money to train Indians who do not even, some of them are not even literate. They actually say this in documentation. They're not even literate. Why don't we take American students that don't maybe want to go to college and have them trained in this industry? This to me is it's like the most unpatriotic idea in the world, and we need to put an end to it. What should is reshoring of the tech industry something that you look at?
Yeah, it's super important. So the economy grows when technology grows, right? So any industry that's at the cutting edge of technological development is going to have the highest profit margins, and is going to be the most likely to generate sort of productivity saving innovation, right? And that's where you really get the margin. Anybody can create an agricultural economy, but the margins are really low on that. The biggest margins, the most profitability is always on the highest tech stuff. Mm-hmm. So what reshoring is all about is it's about ideally maintaining our cutting edge and making sure that, the preponderance of high-tech manufacturing and the tech industry remains in America. So I think the offshoring of the tech industry to India and the Philippines and places like that, I mean, it's beyond dangerous. I mean, really what we're doing is we're sacrificing the economic future of this nation, not just for 10 years, but 100 years down the road. What we're doing is like voluntarily foregoing the Industrial Revolution.
Oh,
it's like
I love
saying,
that.
It's like saying, we don't want to be a part of the Industrial Revolution. It's like, okay, but if you do that, now you're Turkey.
Right.
You're going to be poor for 200 years.
That's a perfect analogy there. What we've done in China is we've funded their rise. Now they're a military power as well as an industrial manufacturing power and a growing, tremendous economy compared to where they were only 20 years ago. And what we're doing is that was through manufacturing. We talk about bringing manufacturing home. And while our eyes are looking on this, understandably, everybody doesn't want to talk about India. I can tell you this, I'm seeing all these conversations, and I'll even hear people list off countries and miss India accidentally. Nobody wants to talk about it because what is happening is that Salesforce and Indeed and Microsoft and these massive tech company investments in India and data centers, billions of dollars in data centers and building up their, of course, they have to have the energy to fuel those data centers.
Imagine if that industry was here.
Yeah. Imagine if it wasn't just on the coast, but across this country, we have so much need of data centers. Imagine if every state had because we need more than 50 data centers. What if every state had a massive data center, and then we also built up our infrastructure to handle that? We're literally in the process of moving that off. Are we going to see a demand? Are you out there talking about this? What can we do to demand that we don't create China 2.0, which is actually India? And we just call them partnerships. And I just don't understand why we need partnerships where everybody's talking about India as a partner. This is India's thing, by the way. This is going back decades where they built this up.
Yeah.
They're calling it partnerships. But what it is it's offshoring and draining us of all of our wealth. They're sending Indians here and they're telling them photocopy and gather the intel from the business environment in which you work in, then come back to work in India, and we're going to build up here, and we're offshoring jobs and the facilities there. They're actually doing espionage. So this is like China 2.0, but it's named India. And by the way, they're also demanding that you share or hand over your patents to Indian nationals or India. So give us some forewarning about